President Trump's fast-moving tariff policy continuing to puzzle investors. Here with the latest, Yahoo Finance's Washington correspondent, Ben Werschkel. The latest, I believe, that we heard from the president was this morning when he talked about firing back at China in terms of potentially increasing the tariffs even more on that country.
For sure, yeah, Julie. So this came in a post from Trump at 11:14 a.m. After this spike that you and Jared already talked about in the 10 a.m. hour that also sort of emanated from the White House and the White House pushing back on that. But his threat at 11 a.m. was against China, and what he announced is that he will do, in addition to what are 54% duties on China set to go into effect this week, he would do an additional 50% in response to China's retaliation. That would put duties at such a level as to essentially make trade impossible. We'll see if he's following through with that in the coming days, but it would set levels at an incredible rate. He's given China until tomorrow to back off their duties, in which point he says he'll go forward. A lot of other kind of fronts here on trade today here in Washington. The Israeli prime minister is in with the president this afternoon. They arrived early this afternoon and they're talking. It's unclear what sort of comments we're going to get from there, but Netanyahu said he was coming to Washington specifically to talk about a few issues, but trade being one of them. Israel, which considers itself one of America's closest partners, is on this list of reciprocal tariffs, so it's set to get new duties this week as well. And so Netanyahu's there to talk about that and a few other issues. A lot of other fronts here as well on Capitol Hill. I know you wanted to talk about, Julie.
Yeah, let's talk about that. And by the way, we're waiting to see if there are any headlines coming out of the discussion between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Reporters will be asking them questions, so we'll be monitoring that. But in the meantime, Congress has been trying to mount an effort to at least delay or forestall these tariffs in some way. There's a bill that's been gaining some Republican support, and the White House now has a response to that.
Yeah, so the bill here is called the Trade Review Act, and this is a bill that would give Congress, basically take Congress back some of its authority on tariffs, basically allow Congress to review a tariff, and then if they don't respond in 60 days, the tariff disappears. So Congress could essentially veto tariffs. It has shown significant support. There's 7 Republican senators who have expressed their support for it. That's not enough to get to the 60-vote threshold, and with Trump announcing this afternoon he's looking at a veto, that would require 67. So it's got an uphill climb, first in the Senate, then in the House, where Speaker Johnson this afternoon talked about how he is very unlikely to ever bring this to the floor. But it is a sort of show of how especially these plain state Republicans, these are folks from like Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, who are behind this bill. This is the area that they're feeling the pinch most directly, and they're willing to push back to the president on it too. So it's one of the things that's going to be considered this week. Trump's trade representative is also going to be on the Hill this week, so he's expected to get an earful as well.
Yeah, and this coming, of course, after a weekend of mass protests on the streets. So obviously these folks are hearing from their constituents, Ben.
Yeah,
thank
a lot
you
of calls
so
for certain.
Yes, thank you so much. President Trump speaking after holding a bilateral meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, addressing the increased China tariffs.
They put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs were already. And I said, if that tariff isn't removed by tomorrow at 12 o'clock, we're putting a 50% tariff on above the tariffs that we put on.
We have these comments from President Trump, and it doesn't feel like things are that much clearer here.
No, they're not. And I think we're going to continue to get that lack of clarity because, again, he says it, he doesn't say it. Somebody else says it, then he denies it. And then, he floats the idea that maybe. And so the markets continue to try to respond to every headline. But at some point, the market's just going to stand back and say, you know what? It's going to sell until we get some clarity. Now, I don't want to see that happen, but at some point, investors will just get frustrated with the lack of direction.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't seem like that direction and clarity is coming remotely soon.
It doesn't feel like it, but it's funny because look at how the market's reacting today. What we all thought was going to be another really negative day today has not turned out to be that bad. While we may end up down a little bit, it's not going to be down the 5 or 6% that we saw the Asian markets and the European markets, right? So there's a little bit of relief from that, and I think it's giving people the sense that the sellers are getting exhausted. While that doesn't mean that prices are going to go straight up, it just might mean that we've kind of hit a level where it's okay for now until it gets more clarity, whether it's through earnings season, whether it's through the next Fed meeting.
I wanted to check on another group here, and that's U.S. listed shares of Chinese companies. They're under pressure as President Trump is now threatening more tariffs on China. He said this morning on social media that the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50%. Now, if you recall, the tariffs on China that are set to go into place are already 54%. So that would be a lot of tariff. I'm taking a look at the Wi-Fi Interactive here. We just showed a few of those China stocks. This is a bigger look here, what we've seen. There's Alibaba, PDD, NetEase, JD.com. So you see obviously broad selling. I'm going to take it to the 3-day look because as we did earlier with Jared, that shows that since the beginning of the sell-off, obviously then you have that additional headline today. But Baba falling almost 19% in that time.
None of that is surprising, right? Yeah. Based on what the headlines are. But it's interesting, and I think I said this to you once before. I don't buy Chinese stocks. I just think there's so many other places for me to put my money. But I'm not surprised by what we're seeing, considering the level of rhetoric that's coming out of the White House towards China, and the fact that China's pushing back and saying, too bad.
And there's also been some interesting reporting out of the Wall Street Journal that the two sides, unlike many of the other sides that have tried to negotiate, Beijing has tried to sort of go through traditional diplomatic channels. Right. They've done it the same way for many years. And it looks like with the Trump administration, that is just not an approach that works. They like a more informal, direct.
But he likes Truth Social. He wants to negotiate
he wants them to tweet
on
him.
Truth Social.
Yeah, well.
But it is to your point.
That doesn't seem to be happening with the Chinese anytime soon.
No, not at all. Yeah. And to your point, I actually think that the Chinese stocks, I think they could continue to come under pressure.
Okay.